work session of the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District board meeting. And the meeting is now in session. And if Angelique Nome could call the roll, I'd appreciate it.
Definitely. Director Eisenbeis
Here.
is here. Director
Hi,
King
everybody.
is. Hello. Director King is excused.
Good to see
Director
you,
Mueller.
Ariana.
Here.
Hi.
Director Lane is excused. Director Calkins is here. Director Johnson is here.
Here.
Director Ralston is here.
Present.
And Chair Stegman is excused.
Great. Thanks, Angelique. I'll read this. This is the part of the agenda during which the board will hear community comments on district business. If you're online, please use the raise hand feature to alert staff that you wish to speak. Angelique, do you see any or notice anybody?
Don't see
Anybody
anybody
online? As there are no public comments, the board will move to the next agenda item. But first, I just wanted to remind everybody this is a work session and the board's not intending to take any action or make any votes today. And I want to thank staff and leadership for taking time this evening to support the board. And thank you, board members, for also taking some of your evening to be here. Appreciate it. And so I'd like to welcome back Matt Berlin and Andrew Riggs to take on the agenda item, which is the presentation of the district's level of service as it relates or as they relate to the district's strategic plan. So with that, Matt, I'm assuming I'm turning it over to you.
Sure, unless Colin would like to say anything in advance.
No, you can get going. I think just now that I'm here, I just feel that this is such an important conversation and just an exciting moment for us as a staff to, now that we have this adopted strategic plan and strategic priorities, really digging in deep, developing the community expectations and the really robust technical levels of service. And so it's just an opportunity to connect board priorities to what staff's work is, and then be able to communicate it as what the community expectations and what the community expects us to do. So that through line is just really exciting. And this is work that we've contemplated and worked in small and large ways over the years. So just a huge amount of gratitude to Matt and Andrew for really driving this work forward. Pass it over to Matt. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Colin. So good evening, everybody, and excited to be here tonight. Take your time in the evening to talk about this really substantive and important work. We're providing an update on this project from the levels of service side. We've talked a lot about the strategic plan, and we're excited to engage you in discussion around what's to come over the next year. I just want to take a minute to acknowledge the direction of Colin, Rowan, and the work that Andrew and I have been doing. It's been really great to work with Andrew from a technical perspective. He's got so much background with levels of service at the district. So I want to share my appreciation for them as the project team. I want to also acknowledge quickly Abby Hall and Laura Hickey, who aren't here, but from Collaborative Decision Resources, and how important they've been in connecting levels of service with the strategic plan through our discussion with the board, leadership, management, and staff. And then finally, I want to do special thanks to Jason Bernagos and Corinne DeLeon and Janine Jeruso. I think Jason's on the call. The others I don't think are, but from Jacobs, they've been our consultant who's really helped us dive in on these levels of service. So thank you, Jason, for your leadership there as well. The real challenge with this work is that it's really deep and it's wide and it's got a lot of information and it's very comprehensive. Through the strategic plan, we know that we developed and published our community levels of service, a huge step forward. And what we're doing now is working through the process to have a conversation with staff on the technical side of the levels of service framework. So the purpose of tonight's work session is to provide an update, a touch point for you so that you're aware of the work that we're doing, and engage in a very particular discussion around how this work will be helpful to you and what you should expect, how we're going to develop it and roll it out over the next year, what you should expect when we come to talk to you about it next. So I'll provide an overview of a bit of the development process that we've gone through, as I usually do, and then I'll share some scenarios to set some expectations of what's to come over the next year and years to come. So in advance of that, I would like you to think about your role as directors, particularly thinking about the kinds of questions that you're asked by your constituents about what the district does and how we do it. So as I'm talking, give that some thought, and I'll prompt you in a couple of slides so we can have a discussion around that. As a reminder, I've said this work is comprehensive. It covers a lot of ground, and thus it's challenging to dig in without getting overwhelmed. It happens daily for me. So we've taken a really iterative process to work from the strategic level down to the technical level. And by the end of the month, we expect to have something to work from that is total, that has strategic and technical levels of service outlined, along with KPIs, performance measures, and some identified staff to work with. So to that end, we want to frame tonight's discussion around how levels of service will provide value for you as the board of directors in the year to come. And I'm hopeful that the discussion will help us provide useful and accessible tools in September when we return to share the full matrix and its applications. So familiar slide probably. We've been working through the steps of levels of service development since last September and even before that. You'll recall that after the October board retreat, the project team on our end met with staff to initiate department level discussions. We've been sort of ping-ponging between the board and staff, where after the board work session in December to define strategic priorities, we then went back to staff to engage with the high-level community levels of service introduction, and then followed that with work sessions in January. This was all captured after review in the final strategic plan. So staff informed and reviewed and refined those levels of service. And then we initiated the discussion with staff on technical levels of service in February. We had a great interactive exercise. It was around 30 minutes, but we got over 170 responses that we have been working to fit into this framework. We worked with the executive team over the last couple of months to outline an implementation plan that I'll talk a bit more about at the end of these slides. And we're set to engage staff to draft the technical levels of service this month. So a lot is happening, and the iteration is what's made it work. We've been fortunate to have great consultants, a great project team, very enthusiastic staff, and a great board and a great executive team. Everybody's engaged. So it's good. It feels like we're making good progress. Some might remember this slide from last year. Last year in June, we met for a work session, and we talked about what we were thinking about this project, how we were going to take on the concept of levels of service. You'll see some familiar questions on the left. How much service do we provide? How do we provide service delivery? How do we evaluate our performance? These are questions we were hoping to answer with approach to levels of service. And we also talked about how we were going to incorporate it at every level of the organization, at the strategic level, at the operational level, and the tactical level. You may also remember this example, which was intended to show how our tactical work, our operational work, could roll up to our strategy that would help us to define how we deliver our service. And we used responding to flood emergencies as an example. So I'm going to talk about responding to flood emergencies as an example today to sort of relate back to this conversation, and specifically how we talked about levels of service. When we talked about level of service when it comes to responding to flood emergencies, we had just an idea that maybe we would have 24 hours be our level of service, and then how we would accomplish that was a hierarchical relationship that we've reflected in the work over the last year. And we've arrived, right? We've defined our community levels of service now. We have community levels of service that provide the foundation for our service delivery. So when we say we reduce flood risk, we're expected to be strategic about that. We keep our systems reliable. We have good financial stewardship. We're thinking about future climate scenarios. We're thinking about equity. These are the ways that we deliver on the expectations the community has of us. When we're talking about emergency response, it's very similar, right? We're talking about things that on the surface seem very, very obvious or maybe expected from us, but now we have some type of framework in which to fit something like a type 3 incident response team, like I mentioned a couple of slides back. So when we talk about community levels of service, when we put these in the strategic plan and we say, this is what we think that the community expects of us, we say we're going to maintain readiness. So let's talk about readiness, and let's use that as an example to illustrate how we'll approach defining technical levels of service. And again, these are all examples. We've not finalized this matrix at all. So the things I'm going to share are what we expect would be in a table that will be refined and finalized towards the end of Q1 in fiscal year 27, so in September. When we ask ourselves if we're meeting community expectations, one community expectation would be that we maintain readiness, right? That's what we've listed as our community level of service. One action that we do is to maintain a team of specialized staff who are trained and ready to respond to high water events and major storms. And an indicator of that preparedness is how much of our staff is trained up. And again, we're closer to 100% than what's on this window, but our current estimate would be 95% and our target would be 100%. And that tells the community we're almost ready, right? That would be a way to evaluate that component of readiness. So when we think about that, we're really focused on what the community is expected, and we rely on the community to help us understand their expectations and modify our community levels of service so we're clear on what we're striving for. When we talk about technical levels of service, we're talking about something very different. We're talking about how we are meeting the community expectation as defined in that level of service. So when we talk about readiness, when I talk about it, as the person managing the emergency operations plan, readiness to me means managing an incident management team to prepare for and respond to a type 3 emergency incident. So we do all sorts of things to make sure that we're ready. We take multiple actions. We have primary and alternate individuals assigned to each incident management team section. We ensure incident command system training for all of those sections. We have a multi-year training plan and we're on track to implement it. So what's important is that the examples on this table should reflect the expertise and the experience of staff. They should be managed and refined to provide readiness that gets more efficient and more effective as we learn. So we make the call when there are better ways to meet community expectations. Maybe we need to train more. Maybe we need more supplies. We're doing that right now when it comes to our flood emergency action plan. So as we move forward, when the technical level of service side of the matrix is complete, we'll be able to relate them to the community level of service side that we documented in the strategic plan. And that resulting framework should provide the common foundation we need to help staff, management, leadership, and the board communicate about what we do and how we do it. So I've talked a lot. For today, I wanted to set some expectations for next year and do it in a bit of a playful way here. As we continue in the iterative development process, it's been helpful to outline how this will all get implemented and be valuable to each of us. And so for this part of the work session, I want to focus on how these tools will provide value to you, our board. So mentioned at the beginning, we think a good way to start that conversation is by asking, what kind of questions do you get asked about the district's work, about what we do and how we do it? And I'll prompt and I'll leave it there and see if anyone has any thoughts so far on the kinds of questions that you get asked about the district's work and how we do it.
This is our turn.
It is. That's, yes, thank you.
How do you know we're ready for a flood?
Great. I'm sorry. I'd like everyone to share their questions, and I won't answer each. I'm going to use the next couple of slides to sort of illustrate how we might respond. So I would love to hear ideas. Thanks.
I'll be honest in that the majority of questions I get are just, we have a flood district. What does that mean? What is it? We have floods? Where?
Yeah.
It's usually a lot of that, like the very, very basics of like where and what do you mean?
Okay. Cool.
With some fun thrown in there. Like I've gotten some fun questions recently, just in general about like water systems in the area. Like where does rain go if it falls in Portland? Kind of stuff, which is also fun.
Excellent.
There's also like if I mention the bonds that they voted on and they remember it, they'll say, how are we spending that money?
Very good.
I get, what does a response look like? You guys are a small agency. How can you possibly respond to a big flood?
Great.
I also get the where question, like what is the extent of the district's operations or system? Sort of what if scenario type questions, like how big of an event can the system withstand? What happens if there's an earthquake? Those kinds of questions.
Mhm.
I got
Great.
one a couple of weeks ago about, oh, do you guys deal with flooding on Johnson Creek? So that sort of goes to Dan's question about geographic scope.
Yes. I also get sometimes, what are you going to do about the water quality in Fairview Lake, for example? That's a big one. And what is a managed floodplain?
Great questions. I'll invite more, but one other follow-up question I have is, have you felt able to answer these questions? It sounds like some of them are hard to answer, frankly. Are there floods is an important question, Director Johnson, and that's an easy one to answer, but connecting someone to the information might be a challenge. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, at least on my end, I feel like we've gotten and increasingly gotten like some good resources. I will say at the very beginning when I first started, it was a little hard to explain in short terms all of this stuff in a really concise manner. And I feel like we've gotten some like really great stuff over time, from the like uh stakeholder engagement folks there, or whatever you call yourselves. But that kind of like shorthand stuff has been good. It has been easier to manage. A lot of the questions I get from people are fairly basic. In like my understanding is in, I don't know, former environmental engineer, I guess. So that helps. But I don't get as many like policy or technical questions most of the time.
Got it. So we have a wide constituency where I think we're all aware that some folks don't know that we exist and don't know that we do things. Does anyone ever get questions from an informed constituent about whether we're meeting our expectations, or what's going well, that kind of question, from people who are affording the rates that help us do our work? No. Okay.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I think I don't get those kind of questions at all. I think there's more of an expectation that, as Director Calkins brought up, that it's like, yeah, didn't we vote for a bond? And
Mhm.
I'm assuming you guys are like building what you said you were going to build,
Mhm.
that kind of thing, as opposed to how many staff do you have that are trained that can respond in 24 hours? It's not no tactical types of questions at all that I ever get.
Understood.
Yeah.
But it sounds like someone was asking about how big of an event we could respond to, which I think can be somewhat related to our capacity and our readiness. And that's a helpful example, I think, to kind of relate to some of what we're talking about here. And I think those are great examples of questions, and I would expect that you'll get more, and maybe some that are more specific. And I remember when we go ahead, Steve. Thanks.
Matt, so the question you asked about like are questions being raised from more informed constituents. I think some of those folks called maybe directly into the district, right? Because we had inquiries about people that live or have a business kind of in the managed floodplain, and they have some localized potential flooding that isn't necessarily directly tied to our system and our system performance. It's more of a local, just on the property um, drainage issue, right? So it's good to maybe explain that a little bit to the board too, that a lot of these questions around the level of service do come directly to the district,
That's right.
directly to staff, and maybe explain a little bit about the nature of those types of questions, and that might help kind of connect why this is so important too.
Well, sure, yeah, and I think questions from all constituents across the district are relevant here, and those that really focus on what we do and why we do it and how we do it are questions that the tools we're working on are going to help us answer. And I remember going back to early last calendar year where you as the board were just starting out, and there were questions around like, how are these projects related? How does the facilities plan fit with the emergency operations plan, with the watershed plan, all at once? And when we were thinking about that, we thought, you know what, a framework would really explain how one of these items is related to service delivery, and maybe perhaps they're both related to the same service delivery or other dimensions of the same service delivery. And so another question that I was thinking about was really the questions that you have about what's going on. And so I thought I would share a few slides to demonstrate what it might look like. And again, these are theoretical and conceptual, but because we've made such great progress, we're starting to think about what the product's going to look like down the road. And where it's going to be really important in designing that product is how it helps you answer those questions. So as you continue to serve your role, the questions that come up for you should help us design and refine the tools we're developing so we can help you help us. So if that works, I'll just jump into one of the slides, if that's good, unless there's any questions. Okay. So one question that I think we all might get is, are we on track, right? Whatever way of asking that question, are we doing what we thought we would be doing? It's kind of a performance or a progress check. And the way that we might respond to that question is an illustration of our community levels of service outcome using a high level measurement. And so what that might look like, I'm sorry about the red text, but I want to make sure it's not taken out of context. But having a dashboard that's able to explain the delivery of our community levels of service and whether we're doing great, we need a little help, or we're doing not so well and we need to rechart, is really helpful, right? So from a community standpoint, when we talk about our expectations, we can share with the board an overall one-page summary of whether we're meeting our expectations. And I think that would be helpful for everyone involved to have a snapshot of a dashboard. And then you have the option to drill down a little bit. So let's say as a board member, you're talking to a constituent and they say, what's going on over there? Are you guys doing well? And you say, yeah, we're meeting expectations. We want to dive in a little bit on maintaining readiness. And so when we talk about maintaining readiness, we have a number of actions that we're doing, and some are going well and some aren't going well. And so we're gonna try to help staff identify ways to solve the things that aren't going well. And that's the idea, is to think about those questions and the kinds of things that you would like to know about all the details that last June, I think everybody said they wanted to stay out of, and be able to look at it at a high level picture. Another question you might ask is, what's changed, right? So, okay, we've been in the works. We had our strategic plan in 2027 start. It's now 2029. What are we doing every year to make improvements? And so what we might want to show is a similar graphic that shows trend lines for how we're achieving community levels of service. How are we meeting expectations? So last year we weren't doing so well. We had an adjustment. We had some priorities shift. things got better, we're doing better, right? We're making progress on the things that we're trying to meet and achieve. And in the same way, you could say, well, okay, yeah, but what about readiness? You guys talked about doing a lot more for readiness last year. So you drill down a little bit more and you understand on the technical side what staff is doing to achieve that community level of service. The outcome here is a foundation where we can talk about the same thing without getting overwhelmed in the details. And then the last question I wanted to share, which is a little bit different, but it's important, I think. What are your current or future priorities? So things are going well, great. What are you planning next and why? Like what is the reason why you're choosing to focus on these service areas? This is about evaluation and its prioritization. And I think it comes from an annual report that we'll provide on the technical levels of service that might help inform budget priorities and strategic plan adjustments. And I talked about this early on, that when we have strategic priorities, that when you define a priority like sustaining and deepening partnerships, that influences multiple community levels of service, and it influences several technical actions that we're doing in order to meet those expectations. And so as we imagine what a dashboard might look like, again, conceptual, these are just examples. If you wanted to go into the dashboard and say, staff, last year we told you to enhance organizational strength. What are you doing to respond to that? We would say, well, we've got enhancing organizational strength. There's multiple levels of service where that work is reflected. When we talk about maintaining readiness, we have 4 different program elements that we've spent more time on in order to make ourselves stronger. And that's the idea. So if you're able to get a lot of information in a brief snapshot, we could find a way, a common foundation to communicate about these things and relate strategic direction to technical day-to-day work in a way that everybody understands. Any questions about the last 3 slides, the visualizations or the concepts here? Because it's just conceptual stuff, but I think it's meaningful and I think it could bring a lot of power to the discussion.
No questions, but I really like
No
the way you're
questions.
thinking about it.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I think that as we continue to develop these tools, I know again, like this is iteration, but Andrew and I were talking about what would happen if we didn't share this information early and came and said, it's done, right? That would be a harder conversation to have because the real value here is being able to use these tools in order to communicate from our perspectives, right? So the district does a great deal of work. We have a fantastic, talented, enthusiastic team of people who are constantly going all the time. And this is a way to talk about all of their work in a simple way to help guide its strategy. So thank you. I just want to share a brief overview of the process that we've worked on with the executive team in order to implement this work over the next year. Certainly not as fun as looking at cool graphics, but I want to make sure that you hear it and have a chance to comment on what to expect over the next year. So beginning in July, we'll work from this foundation we've built in order to start implementing a process for reporting and evaluation. We're going to aim for the end of fiscal year next to have a full report of a year of work summarized with KPIs or key performance indicators and performance measures. And so through that implementation plan, we'll define how we're going to facilitate and coordinate that process, who develops and tracks the KPIs and performance measures, and then who receives the report and approves the report and then delivers it to the receiving audience. And so there's a lot of pieces here. Right now, we'll continue to develop the technical levels of service. In Q1, for the end of September, we'll come back with an initial report. We'll share this information, but it won't be conceptual. It will have more substantive details in it. So we'll be able to talk about actual trend lines, and we'll be able to talk about actual progress towards our KPIs. We'll work on board and staff engagement in the same way we did last year. After having that first quarter to talk about how we're doing, we'll talk about how that might influence priorities for the next fiscal year. And then we'll work on refinements to the levels of service and KPIs. And then at the end of the fiscal year, we'll prepare our report. Now, what that looks like is different for community levels of service versus technical levels of service. Again, it's really important to focus on that community levels of service are aspirational. What the community expects of us is what we're working towards, but it's what we're aspiring to achieve. And there's a lot of examples where the community wants a lot of protection, and the current status of our levee system doesn't provide it, but we're working on it, right? And so bringing those bars together and being clear about how much we're doing to meet those expectations is really important. So we would communicate what services the public can expect from the district, report on how well those services are being delivered, and that would inform the next strategic plan. It could help inform budget priorities, and it certainly can help inform public-facing communications. So the audience for that report is the board and the community. When it comes to technical levels of service, these are measurable objectives. We're setting goals and we're able to achieve them. And so we're defining the actions the district is taking at a programmatic or operational level to deliver those services. And as I said earlier, we're constantly making them better. That's our job, right? So we're using our expertise to make sure that we're doing the best work possible to meet our expectations and those of the community. So that report is to the executive team, and it can inform annual budget priorities, workload, staffing, team priorities, planning documents, day-to-day activities, everything that we're doing on the day-to-day in order to do our work the way that we think it should be done. So from a technical levels of service standpoint, it's on an annual reporting cycle. We're defining, we're measuring, and we're managing performance to ensure that our projects and programs are consistently meeting our priorities and those community expectations. So we'll summarize that work every year. Every year we'll have a report on how things are going and what kind of adjustments we're making. From a community level of service standpoint, we're defining the outcomes and service expectations that are experienced by the public. And so we'll take those annual technical levels of service reports and we'll build on that into a 3 to 5 year reporting cycle. That's a summary of our work reflected in the strategic plan. So you'll have multiple touch points to say, how's it going? What is the trend line? How are things going? What about our strategic priorities? And then we'll be able to summarize it in a report that's associated with the 2027 to 2029 strategic plan. So that's the implementation plan at a high level for us. And that's an example or a series of visualizations and examples to show you what you might expect from this work over the next year. And I want to leave some time for discussion and open it up to any other questions you might have. But I hope this was helpful to kind of imagine what these tools might offer you as the board. So thank you. Steve, yeah.
Matt,
Sorry. Yeah.
I think I just want to make a comment maybe for the board and maybe prompt a question, but we've gone pretty deep here, and I feel like developing kind of this first level of service, staff has really done a good job of really comprehensively kind of combing everything we do and trying to quantify and figure out what's important to the community. You're not getting a lot of questions about items that go this deep. We're getting some questions. We're not getting a ton, but maybe, I'd be interested to hear from the board about your overall sense. Like, are we going too deep here? Should we simplify and bring this up a level for the community, knowing that most folks, even those in the managed floodplain, don't get into maybe the concern of our level of service for some of these elements. And this can be more of an internal tracking, obviously. We're interested in finding what's the right balance of internal tracking that's not that's not inefficient, that's not resulting in stuff that doesn't really matter, that doesn't really help us make good decisions. But also we're interested in finding the right things that the community cares about so that the dashboard can be just that and simple, because it does feel like we've gone a little bit deep maybe.
Kayla?
Oh, Dan was first. You can go first.
Oh,
Dan.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Director Calkins. Matt, thanks for this presentation. I really appreciate all of the effort and thought that's gone into this. I guess to Steve's question, I would ask a somewhat, in my mind, related question, which is, how is staff thinking about the number of levels of service, either at the community or at the technical level? Like, what's the right number? What informs your thinking about what makes the right number?
I'll thank you. That's a great question. I may ask Andrew to respond as well. And I think the main approach that we've taken, sort of from a philosophical perspective, starting early, is to wrap our hands around all of it and then trim it as we go. And so right now it's bigger and it's going to get smaller. We chose to take that path because of the comprehensive nature of the work and how there's a lot of interconnectivity with things. And I think what we would strive for is an efficient model, and that's the goal. So now it's big, and it won't get bigger, but we expect it to get smaller and more refined. Andrew, can I ask you to comment on that as well, if you don't mind?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everybody. And I'm traveling right now. I'm not driving, so but I am sorry if my sound quality isn't the best. Yeah, I think it's a really great question that we've definitely grappled with. And as Matt said, we've really been like, give us everything, and then we can thin the garden a little bit. And that said, Matt's presentation today covered both community levels of service and technical levels of service in a pretty in-depth way, which isn't necessarily what we would intend to present to the public fully, right? And so when we talk about that single slide, a single dashboard of, the community levels of service and how we're going in this sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, middle way, that's a high level overview, and that's sort of the level at which I would expect the public to engage with this information. Like, I could envision them going to the what we do part of our website, and hey, guess what? Here's a map of our districts, since that seems to be a big question. Here's the things we do and how they're doing. And then for those members of the public that were interested, as a resource page, like, oh, our levee system is meant to be to protect up to 38 feet of elevation on the Columbia River. Currently, it's at 36.5 feet. And hey, here.
Sounds like
we lost Andrew.
Yeah. I think where he was going with that was being able to connect interested parties to dig down when they feel like it's relevant to their interest. And that's often a way that we can make mistakes, is by just talking about things at the high level. So being able to, even as board members, having an understanding of how well things are going, but having a particular interest, we would want to make sure that if you had that interest, you had access to the supporting information. And I think that's where he was headed with constituencies.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back. Everybody froze for a moment. I apologize. Yeah, thanks. I don't have to reiterate, but just we want to provide enough information for the different interests to get into the basics, but I also fully appreciate not wanting to overwhelm people with information, and that's definitely not the goal. And tracking things just to track things is an utter and complete waste of time in my book. And I think the audience there, really quick, just to wrap up this piece, right? When we talked about the audience of the technical levels of service really being the executive team, that's important, because if Steve says, hey, Andrew, you have one KPI for your program and it's really easy for you to meet and it doesn't mean anything to me, I need to be a lot more thoughtful about what I'm presenting to show how my program's doing. And that's a really important dialogue, because if I can, through those KPIs, say, hey, here's where we're lacking, and here's my plan to address those, and this is the support that I need from the organization, from leadership, from my colleagues, then that becomes a really powerful tool for me to advocate for my body of work within the organization. And that's at a much deeper level than I would imagine that the public would probably be interested in, likely the board would be interested in. But if at a high level we show those KPIs and we go into our next strategic planning cycle and the board notices like, hey, this area has been flat for a while and that's really important. What's going on there? Maybe that becomes a strategic priority in the next strategic planning cycle, and you guys direct the executive team to really emphasize that area so that we can fill out that part of our organization that's a critical service. So it's really meant to be a conversational tool and not to overwhelm anybody and not to bog anything down through overly complicated reporting. I'll stop there. Thanks, and I'm sorry for the technology glitch.
Thanks, Andrew. Director Calkins. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, agree with just like all the thoughtfulness that is going into this. I've thought that every time you all have shared this work. I think maybe a similar, like in the same vein of what we're talking about in terms of level of detail, I also found myself thinking about like the operational overhead and resources that go into building it versus maintaining it. So like you were in the depths of, like you said, going pretty deep, getting like really, really detailed now. But I'm wondering about like what is automated within this in the future to get to those dashboards to support decision making in the ways that we're talking about it, and how are you thinking about where it becomes a burden for the team and taking them away from their work? So I'm sure you've put thought into that. I'm just curious to hear more.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really great question, and I'm gonna provide an answer, and then I might tap Jason if you wouldn't mind commenting. But I think what we've tried to do and why we've taken such care with engagement is that we're trying to organize a body of work that reflects all of the departments and the things that they do, but we're not trying to track everything. So a great example is all the things that operations does to keep our system reliable. Or to keep us into the RIP program, for example, there's like 60 different items. And because we have a database that's tracking that, our performance measure for that could just be, have we met what's in the database? We're good to go. So we're looking for efficiencies rather than just tracking everything. And part of what we've identified through our current technical level of service engagement is that, and then I'll get specific, I think what we'll end up with is about 12 people who have about 5 things that they're going to report on every year. And so we've winnowed it down using our approach so that by the staff member, we're not talking about a heavy lift, but it's collaboration and it's sort of a collective effort, and then intending there to be automated forms, and then to build something that's automated so that the data gets populated already. The dashboard is built, we we get the data, we put it in, and we're good to go. And Jason and his team have been really helpful in sharing what the best practices are in the industry, and shared a lot of great examples about how that's done. With organizations like ours or even bigger that have much longer lists of performance measures and KPIs. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind maybe saying something in that regard, Jason, and how you all have helped.
Yeah, happy to. And I think speaking to some of the example dashboards that Matt was showing, I think the idea is, as we work on figuring out what an ideal dashboard could look like, maybe utilizing what the district already has with SharePoint technology, is to have dashboards already set up, obviously to the question of what would be the investment, the upfront investment of creating a dashboard. Obviously there would be that, but the thing that we want to make it as easy as possible for each division that has a responsibility to report, like an annual update of the data, that there would be a pretty simple like spreadsheet that could be you could tally up the data at the end of the year, and then that could be uploaded to a SharePoint dashboard, and really trying to think about it as how simplistic the manual transfer of the data could be, but then it's really about that visualization of the data to be able to communicate what have been what has been the progress on the different levels of service, the KPIs that Matt was indicating. But yes, so there I think that is what a lot of different utilities across the country use as communication pieces. But I think that the thing is you want to make that reporting as easy as possible, and then that upfront investment in what you want to display with the dashboard is something I think to get feedback on, to really say what do I want to represent when those KPIs are updated annually.
And then I just had one other question. It's a quick one. On the community side, I hear us talking about kind of like the website as a place where we provide transparency and you can see like the top level and dig deeper. Are there any risks to that we're thinking through on how to mitigate those? Just like for how having that information out there might produce fear or misunderstanding or be misleading in any way?
I think that's an inherent part of the process. And so conceptually, I think we have a desire to have some alignment with, what we're saying is community levels of service. And then we have a drop down that says, what do we do? Right. So some of those things are directly overlapping and some of them aren't. And there may be an effort to try to align them, which could mean we share more information, but we'd be strategic about it. I think what we don't want to do is share information that leads to a misunderstanding. And I think that's the key part of the conversation. So we're having that conversation. We haven't really landed on what to do about that yet, but alignment, I think, is a natural thing to strive for.
Thank you.
Thanks. Director Mueller. Should I be calling folks? Is that okay? I know there is. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Director Mueller. Thank you.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground already, but sort of getting back to what Steve was asking about the level of detail. And, I guess I had gone through the materials, the packet in advance and so forth, and looked at it and gone, and then thinking about the question, it sort of in my head, what I'm seeing in the presentation and the description of what staff has been doing, I think about it sort of like the iceberg. You only see a small part of it. There's a whole lot more that's below the surface. And I sort of feel like the presentation and the description of what staff's been engaged in is sort of taking a little bit of a look under the water. But on an ongoing basis, I would not expect to be seeing that part of the iceberg, but sort of only the higher level summary, the roll up, however you want to put it. In one of the slides that's in here, I think on page 4, whatever, talked about different audiences and had different boxes and sort of the more detailed ones are ones that staff are going to pay attention to and aren't necessarily going to be stuff that we're going to try and communicate to the community. A lot of those, presumably those technical measures might not even make sense to folks in the community. Certainly won't make sense to certain befuddled board members as they try and make my way through the stuff. But I have great confidence that the operations team knows what that stuff is and that they're measuring and monitoring the things that they need to do in order to accomplish their job. And that I just sort of look at it as those things are going to roll up each level, and the audiences are only going to look down so far, and the staff are going to see all the detail from underneath, and sort of two multiple different angles, but not necessarily showing the entire universe. Because I already feel a little bit overwhelmed. So anyway, that's my excuse me, my rambling answer to Steve's question.
Thank you, Director Mueller, and I'm glad. I like iceberg analogies when they don't involve the Titanic, so this is great.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the comment very much, and I will. I think I will admit that I think we're intentionally sharing more with you than we would through our, using this tool in order to inform you on how we're doing, for example, would be a simple communication. It's my goal that you understand what we're doing. And as Director Ralston, you asked a question of how can I help? How can we help when we have the strategic plan approved? And my answer was about vocabulary. It really is about learning a vocabulary that we can all use to understand each other. And if staff comes and says they need more resources, or a constituent comes and says, why aren't you providing greater stewardship? We now have a vocabulary to use to connect the sides of our work together. And, it's bumpy for sure, and it can be overwhelming, but I am leaning towards sharing more now so that we're all more informed when we start to operationalize this. I hope that's helpful. Go ahead, Andrew. Oh, Director Alston, you had your hand up.
Andrew, go ahead if you have comment, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is an iterative process as well, right? This is the first time we're doing this at this scale, and it's going to evolve as our needs evolve. If it's too complicated, we can thin it out. If it needs some more info, we can add that. It's not a one and done, set in stone thing. It can be very flexible to meet the needs of the organization, and we're gonna it's wrong, and we're gonna learn the ways in which it can be improved, and we're gonna fix them, and that's a natural part of the process. And I think ongoing engaged dialogue with the boards about how things are working, how they're not, and what needs to change is tremendously valued to us to get to a place where this really, really reflects and defines the work of the organization so that it helps all of our constituents understand us as an organization, whether that's partner organizations, whether that's a resident that lives in our districts, you know, at all levels. So just know that this is the first iteration of many, many future iterations.
Go ahead, Steve. Or Director Ralston, sorry, you had your hand up before.
Oh, okay. I agree with everybody. The amount of thought that's gone into this work is really good, and I see a lot of different areas that can benefit from the reporting and all of that. But I'll admit to a bit of confusion that I have, or maybe a reaction, that the use of the word level of service for internal capacity building, technical levels of service sort of continues to confuse me a little bit. When I think of level of service more in the community or stakeholder level, I think of things like we were talking about before, like response times or, um, you know, expectations around preparedness that we're certified. That's a service that we're providing as we're providing a level of protection that meets a certain standard, accreditation, certification, whatever. That's a level of service that this agency is delivering to the community. Another one might be, response time. Couple of different levels. I know historically the boards all were taking phone calls from neighbors about, hey, the ditch in the front of my yard is filling up. Can you guys come over with your backhoe and clear it out? And there was an expectation, I think historically, that somebody would get there in a day or two. Maybe those expectations still exist. Maybe that's a service we actually still perform, or maybe not. And then there's the large scale of, if there's, just a much larger scale than a single property matter. And then to take it even further, sometimes in the budget book and in other documents, there's been references to post-event mitigation. And my sense is aside from maintaining and bringing our own organizational systems back up to speed, we're not a restoration agency in terms of post-flood response. beyond the infrastructure and some of those things. So that's my sort of the prism I look through is more from, if I'm in the community, what can I expect from the agency in the way of a service? Not so much how you do it in your capacity building internally and meeting, maintenance objectives, X number of mows per year on the levee, whatever. It's like, well, the service I'm buying is protection. How do we define that? How do we communicate that? So to kind of wrap it up, I'm hoping that a lot of this work can sort of just percolate up to maybe 5 or 6 or 7 community level expectations that share a common language from the bond measure, from just normal sort of community conversations around protection and response, certainly acknowledging the other legislative statutory responsibilities we have. But if we can somehow distill down for the community, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 expectations of service in terms of what they think service means, I think that'll be a huge success. And that obviously then builds trust. But things like response time, if somebody calls the office and says, hey, my front yard's flooding, is there an expectation that you guys go out and deal with that these days? I'll plead ignorance. I don't know if that's what we do still. I know 10 years ago we did that. So if I was to look at a service list, would that function be on the menu of things that the neighborhoods or the businesses or whomever could sort of expect and say, oh, the agency does that, I'm going to give them a call? Or I hear a threat, flooding or whatever from the spring runoff is coming. The agency handles that. They do the risk assessment. If there's a problem, I'll hear about it. Oh yeah, it's interagency. They're the ones I can rely on to make sure there's partnerships and everybody's working together. So anyway, that's kind of long-winded perspective that I have about the community level of service differentiated from the technical. I hate to reference the technical capacity building as a level of service, because the word service to me is more of an external thing as opposed to an internal thing.
Understood. Yeah. Steve.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ralston. I think a lot of what you just asked and said was what I was thinking as well. But and I think it's been said, I just wanted to be more explicit with it, that maybe there's a lot of focus here on the end product, but really a lot of the value that I'm seeing is it's forcing the conversations of staff, right? It's forcing staff to talk about what do we do? And the districts haven't been consistent in the past. And that's not equitable, right? So yeah, somebody calls and they want the ditch cleaned out, and the district in the past has done some of that work, and in some cases not, and it's dependent on maybe which district you've been in. And so this is an exercise in answering those questions for staff, because I have the same questions, like, do we do that? I'm a new guy still, relatively speaking, and I don't know the answer to a lot of these things, and a lot of them there is no answer, right? It's because, well, that district did but that didn't, and now should we? So maybe it's the value in the process as opposed to the end product a little bit. And then, but then exactly what you were saying, the end product for the community should be very explicit, and it should talk about what services do we provide and to what degree and in what scenarios. And that could be something we need at some point to maybe bring back to the board and have a discussion. Like, here's where we're at. Does this meet your expectations? Here's what we have resources to provide. Does that meet the expectations of the board and the community? We're not there yet, but we're getting closer.
Well, I must say that I think with the staff wrestling with this, with the community and stakeholders, is huge. It's needed to be done. So I definitely appreciate the value of that, and that's why I said there's lots of different beneficiaries of this of the effort you guys are going to. But yeah, so I'd just like to reinforce that I think with public communication, fewer higher level service related expectations is where I would, make sure you're really fine tuning that work. But
I really appreciate the comment, and I want to assure everyone, I think we're closer in alignment than you might think. And I think when we aim for 3 to 4 to 5 or 6 statements, I think we're doing a lot more, and I think we're expected of a lot more than that number. But we actually have just what you're saying. And a good example is that a level of service that our constituents receive in the floodplain is not having to pay flood insurance. And they don't have to pay flood insurance because we're accredited, right? And we do the work to meet that accreditation. What work do you ask? Is all in the technical level of service. And we have to track that so that we meet the community expectation of not having to pay flood insurance. Different language, but we're talking about the same thing. So I appreciate your acknowledgement of how important that is. And I think we have room to kind of discuss that more. I don't need to go down that path, but I do appreciate it. And I think this is the perfect place in the future to have a conversation like, should we be addressing nuisance flooding? What would the impacts to our programs be if we chose to address nuisance flooding? How much would that cost to have enough staff on hand in order to do that work? This framework will help us have that conversation. And I hope I didn't steal your thunder, Andrew. I feel like I've heard you say that so many times. Maybe that was what you were going to say.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to echo Director Ralston. You're spot on, and we're on the same page. I think again, this is getting muddled because we are showing you guys under the water with this iceberg analogy, and so these technical levels of service are really at a staff level, and we're using the term level of service. We could change that to a different word, but today we're sharing kind of both above the water and under the water, and I don't want that to be confused as what we're proposing to show the general public, because that's not. We're just showing you guys under the hood. And Matt, yeah, you're exactly right. We've talked about how this tool supports the board. If we have a constituent come into the office and say, hey, what are you doing about water quality in Fairview Lake, and why aren't you doing more? Okay, fair question, interesting question, right? We can go to our environmental level of service, we can go to our environmental program, and we can have a conversation about what we could do, what we as an organization are interested in doing, and where the boundaries of our services lie. And that's a board decision, I think, really, because if something falls outside of our defined levels of service and the board wants us to take action to provide a service that's beyond that, that's a conversation that we're going to have. And then we're going to change our level of service as an organization and change our operations as a result. So I think that's a really, really important way that the public and the board can engage around the levels of service that the district provides.
We're going to do a quick time check. It's about 6:35. Matt, I'll leave it to you to keep running the meeting, but just quick time check there.
Sure. Thank you. Well, we are in the discussion part. If there are no more questions, we can end the meeting. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to give us their thoughts. And again, if I walked away knowing that you all would feel more informed when we come back in 3 months, I think that's a success. And we can try to trim back what we're sharing so it doesn't feel overwhelming. But I do know that when there's a particular interest, we also want to give access to supporting information, and maybe finding that balance is something we can work on.
Yeah, I would just offer like a final comment. I remember my first comment with or conversation with Jim when I was early on, and then with Steve too. I was like, I just want like a quick dashboard that shows me the most important things and if we're on track or not. And so like I feel like the dashboard is like, this is it. So it's like, how often do you get the thing that you asked for? And clearly there is value obviously internally and for decision making with the board. But I'm confident you all will get to the right level of detail for the community as well, and continue to learn and iterate, like you're saying, based on the types of questions that come in. And I even just think about the amount of education that happens when I get questions from the public. So it commonly comes from like me saying like, oh, I'm also an elected local official in the flood safety district. And they're like, what's that? And then it's me offering high level things that lead to them learning more about what it is that we do. So even me, whether they're asking the question or I just am armed with better, really high level information to show the value of what we're doing, like I think that will be, we'll be able to get that through this. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from directors?
I would just say I really appreciate the presentation. I like the thinking about putting together a dashboard to communicate to the public, and I look forward to seeing, in particular, the community levels of service that you come up with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in summary, I think, you have our wholehearted support to keep going. We're not trying to shift directions on you. And I think we're all very appreciative that you're coming to us and giving us frequent updates and having good conversations about it. So we're with you, and we appreciate the work you're doing. So we're looking forward to the next stage.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to ask Director Mueller if you have any comments you'd like to make about the budget process, the TSCC, or what's going to happen at the June board meeting where we adopt the budget. Anything you want to say about that while we're together?
Well, no, Lori has continued to guide us through the process, keep us in compliance, and the next meeting, given that during that last meeting, it was actually a TSCC meeting. They moved forward and gave us their blessing. So it'll now come to the board with all of the previous requirements kind of satisfied. We'll need to go through a few procedural steps, make sure that we hold a public hearing for the thousands of folks that are in the audience in attendance at our meetings to have any public comment on the budget, and then address any last minute adjustments that staff may want to point out to us if need be, and presumably there won't be, and we'll move forward with an adoption. So it should be hopefully about a 10-minute process, but it can be longer if need be.
Yeah. Lori, any comments?
Nope. At this point, we don't have any adjustments to the budget as it was approved by the budget committee. So anticipating, as Eric has described, that it will probably be a relatively quick and painless process to get the budget adopted.
Great. Thanks. Steve, do you have any last words?
No, I don't. Thank you all. This was really good feedback and engagement, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. And I'd like to acknowledge Angelique's work preparing these meetings and corralling us and keeping everything running smoothly. So thank you. And with that, we'll now adjourn our meeting. All have a good evening, and thanks again for taking your personal time to be here after hours for the staff and directors. Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.